Good afternoon. Welcome to evolvednest.org Explained. My name is Dr. Darcia Narvaez, and I'm here with Mary Tarsha. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Darcia.
We are both at the University of Notre Dame's Department of Psychology and Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. Today, we are going to discuss one component of the evolved nest. And I'm going to share my screen now so you can see what that is. There we are. We are going to discuss companionship, responsiveness, and attachment. Now, the reason we focus on the nest is because humans evolved to be nested, and we are in need of that nestedness in order to develop our physiology, our psychology, our social capacities, and our morality. And what happens for kids is when you provide the nest, it optimizes their normal development, fostering their thriving and resilience. What do we mean by child well-being? We mean physical health, happiness and well-being, and thriving, self-acceptance and self-confidence, self-control in all sorts of ways, emotional intelligence, sociality and social skills, empathy and perspective taking, kindness and active curiosity. And we evolved to need to be nested throughout our lives because it supports our thriving when we have many of these same kinds of components of the nest. Our adult or human well-being generally includes having a quiet mind, a sense of presence and creativity, an inner happiness, a vitality, abundance of electricity in your body, abundance of energy, the ability to be listening unconditionally to others, empathy and respect for others and for nature, authentic helpfulness, a personal vision and purpose activated, feeling fully alive, awareness of the sacredness of life, and the ability to love and be compassionate and forgive. So these are the evolved nest components. We've identified 9 here, and they are part of what young children especially need. We need most of these throughout our lives, and many are important for maintaining our well-being and our happiness and all of our capacities fully throughout life. They include 1, soothing gestation and birth, 2, on request extensive breastfeeding, 3, positive moving touch and no negative touch, a welcoming social positive climate, self-directed play with multiple age playmates, warmly responsive nurturing from mothers and others, those are allo mothers, number 6, nature immersion and connection, and healing practices to repair miscommunication or hurts. So these are the kinds of components that we're talking about in this series, evolvednest.org Explained. And we're talking about number 7 today, responsive relationships.
So here's an outline of what we're going to talk about in terms of the 7 component of responsive relationships. And so we'll first talk about Meaty Infants, and next we'll talk about responsive care, what it looks like and what are the effects, and we'll go on to non-responsive care, what that looks like and the harmful effects. Then we'll talk about culture and then how we can learn to be responsive from the beginning. So first of all, we'll talk about Meaty Infants. So Darcia, what does this mean?
Well, we have to understand who we are at birth and how that is related to other, our cousins, other apes, and how much we're developed at birth, and how long it takes for us to mature. So if you look at the bottom line here, the human description, and across the top, it tells you what is being described. So there's gestation, how long we're in the womb, longer than any of the others. Brain volume at full term birth, smaller than any of the others. the eruption of first and last permanent teeth at the years, which is also different from the others. You can see that these are signals of cognitive development. And you can see take much longer to reach maturity, as that last column also indicates 20 years for physical growth. And then the average length of nursing or breastfeeding. You can see the average, we kind of, in our species typical environments, ancestral context, have a similar kind of years of breastfeeding. So we're really born very immature. We look like fetuses until about 18 months of age. And so we need lots of tender care.
Yeah, so that means that if we are born immature with only 25% of our brain developed, at birth, we see that so much brain development needs to take place within those first few years of life. And so we see by the age of 3, we have 80% of the brain is developed. So much is happening from birth to these 3 years. And in particular, the right brain is developing. Right, Darcia? Maybe you want to say something about that?
Sure. And let me say that when we talk about growth and development, it means it's complicated. It's not just getting bigger. It's about coordinating all the systems that have to learn to work together outside the womb, and all the brain cells have to connect and build their communities. All that's influenced by how we treat that child. So right hemisphere development, right brain development before age 2 is fundamental for being a human being.
Mm-hmm. And the right brain is developing faster than the left hemisphere. So that's also a shocker, I think, to some people. The way that we develop is not symmetrical from the different parts of the brain. So the right brain is developing more quickly in the first few years of life. And so that means that the type of care needed is different. You need a lot of responsive care in order to help build that right brain. And also the immune system takes about 6 years. And we see that all of this is happening through developmentally plastic effects, such as epigenetics, which we've talked about in other podcasts as well. Okay, so now we're going on to responsive care. We've seen why, we need a specific type of care because the brain and the infant, developing child, is so young at birth. So what is responsive care? What does it look like, and what are its effects?
Well, we know these things. We know that reciprocal communication is really important. That's where you synchronize the mother and the child. Usually it's mother and child, but it can be father and child, grandmother and child, caregiver, primary caregiver and child. And you synchronize you coordinate your communications so that when you, smile at the baby smiles back, or vice versa. And you also repair dyssynchrony. So maybe the child smiles at you, but you don't smile back. And then that feels like something went wrong for that child. So the baby has to learn how to repair those kinds of dysynchronous moments.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it means meeting the needs in the moment, such as providing reassurance to the child, holding, caring, and rocking. And we've done an entire podcast, and that is a wholeness component on the importance of touch and holding and caring, and also that attuned attention and playful interaction, right? So having the child see the delight and joy, the pleasure, being cared for, seeing that in the face of the caregiver.
So there's a mutual influence that has to keep going on between the mother and the child, the caregiver and the child, so that you feel like you're always in relationship. So you're not detached and off somewhere else emotionally or physically. You're there together, and you're building a friendship in many ways, and you share then activities and ways of being together. So when the child hits her knuckles on the table, let's say, then you have some response to that, and you routinely go through this kind of move that you develop when the child does something, and vice versa. And so you develop these nice little closed, short little narratives or little story kind of active play acting together. That's really important for responsive care. caregivers co-construct then the body, the brain, the psyche. All this stuff is happening in those first weeks. So important, those first weeks, to make sure the baby feels like they're still being cared for in this responsive manner that they felt in the womb. So in the womb, their needs were met immediately through the placenta. There were needed some chemical feeding. It would be there. There was no waiting. So it's really important not to make babies wait, to respond immediately to what they're indicating, to learn their signals, because you're building the brain stem, midbrain, limbic brain. All sorts of parts of the brain are not yet developed, and the parents are really co-constructing it.
Mm-hmm. And I really like how on the slide we have here that all capacities are initially shaped through caregiving practices. So, Tarsha, can you say a little bit about that? So when we say capacities, we're talking psychological capacities as well as other physical capacities as well.
Right. So pretty much everything is shaped in those early years. How self-controlled you're going to be in life, whether you're going to be responsive to others and actually mutually flexible with others in your relationships, how much you like to be with other people. If you're left alone a lot, you're not going to really you learn not to like to be with others because you don't know how to get along with them because you didn't practice it enough when you were a baby. All sorts of things. And your intelligence as well. If you have a parent who says, I love you, and then leaves you to cry, that's not a coordinated signal, right? And so you don't learn to trust what people say, for example, or you don't learn to trust your feelings because they don't work. When you feel terrible, nobody helps you, and so you try to suppress that. So all sorts of systems are going to be well developed or poorly developed based on what your early experience is like, what your routine early experience is like.
Our results in the lab have shown things like perspective taking and empathy and how social dominant you are. All of these are capacities also that are really shaped through the caregiving practices.
Yeah, thanks. So sensitive responsive care then is establishing brain wiring, how well connected and which neurons or brain cells are going to be activated and available to that child. If you leave babies to cry a lot, they're going to have a different wiring than a baby that's never left to cry, for example. And so all sorts of habitual patterns are getting set in these first weeks and first years.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's setting the stage for habits to come and patterns of relating. And so how we say here is the trajectory for habitual patterns and later on in life. And also, the intersubjectivity here, I think this is really a key component. And we've talked about this in other places as well, but with the sensitive responsive care, there's a sharing of the inner world, right? Between the child is sharing his or her inner world with the parent, and the caregiver in a developmentally appropriate way is sharing thoughts and emotions and feelings with the child as well. And so there is a sense of understanding and shared knowledge between both the parent and the child, or the caregiver and the child.
And at the brain level, we call that limbic resonance, when the two limbic systems are kind of activated together and resonating back and forth, that you're able to share that moment of time with one another. And it's, for a baby, it's building their brain, their capacities at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So another way to think about it is providing an external umbilical cord to the child. So you are the placenta. You are acting like a placenta to that child in those first 2.5 years, when we call that babyhood. And that's when they need a lot of good attention, because you don't want their systems to get off track and get dysregulated, because that's setting up the future.
Mm-hmm. And so we see that the emotions and cognitions are built together, right? So it's not either or, right, Darcia?
Yep. Right. So these, neuroscientists who study emotions and they'll say, I'm studying this network, and then the people who study cognition will say, I'm studying this network. Turns out to be the same network, right? So you have to be, a little more aware of how everything is so interconnected. You can't separate out, like genes and environment or nature, nurture. That's all artificial. It's just convenient for researchers to do things like that and get published, but it's not reality. So here, they're integrated here. So how that baby is treated is shaping how they're going to think. It's also shaping how they're going to feel from the recurrent patterns of activity, their sensory motor activity. So how their body is treated, right? So if you pick up a baby in a very haphazard way, you're stressing them out. You're putting them into a shock state. If you let their head drop back, for example, a little baby who doesn't have neck muscles strong enough to keep their head straight. So you have to be, gather them up and hold them with tenderness. And that's part of how you build a sense of security and a sense of active curiosity later on for an intelligent child, as well as a very happy one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. And we see that these experiences are shaping the brain, both the neocortical and the subcortical structures that regulate sociality, which is so important.
That's right.
And so we see the type of care that you're giving the baby, how you're relating to them is how they then will relate. And I know we've said that before, but it's such a key point.
Right. So if you're leaving them to get upset a lot, so routinely let them get upset, distressed, you're teaching their brain to get upset, and that's part of life. And so they can move into patterns of getting upset very easily, and then their corpus callosum, that middle thick part there in the middle of the brain, connects the two halves of the brain. If you're not caring responsively for that child, that won't grow so well, especially in boys. And so they can flip between states, sort of be bipolar, right? Flip into being really mad and then flip into another state, and they may not remember what state they were in before. So it's really important to help them learn to be calm and connected and reassured.
Yeah, this is a great slide. I think this summarizes what we were talking about on the last slide, but it's showing how it's particularly important for the emotional circuitry, right, which is established early in life, is related to the brain's architecture of both morality and ethical expression.
Right. So it's our morality comes up bottom up. It's constructed by your caregiver behavior, and your caregiver's behavior is constructed by the community support and by their parents' support when they were little. So there's intergenerational effects here. It's not just, and we need to say that it's not just mom that's doing this, right? It's a community of supportive caregivers. And after the first few weeks in our ancestral condition, it's not just mom that holds the baby or the young child, it's other caregivers in the community. And so that's what we need for a truly responsive childhood. So here we have humans are biosocial constructions. That means that our biology is shaped by our social experience in early life. And that experience then is shaping what our social capacities are at a biological and then psychological level. So there's a dynamic systems. So early experience shapes the trajectory, as we've said, in this kind of constructive interactionism. And that means that there's a constant interaction between nature and nurture. The baby's a different baby every 5 minutes. And so you need to keep that nested care going, not just put them down and leave them and think, oh, everything's fine. I already fed them. I already changed their diaper. What's wrong? Well, they want to be carried around. That's what they expect. And they want to be with you because, again, it's an external womb experience. They need that umbilical cord of attachment with you.
Mm-hmm. And being carried around is providing the right type of stimulation that they need. right? So it's not too much stimulation and it's not too little by being left alone, but because there is this constant interaction between nature and nurture, between the genes and development that's taking place, the baby needs and is expecting to be on and being held and being carried around. And that's providing the right type of stimulation needed for the brain to develop in the right way.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you don't really know what's developing in that child at any given time. Every child's different. And so the timing and duration and intensity of whatever care they're giving matters for a particular system that's developing at that time. There's this maturational schedule for many things. And so you want to make sure you're nesting that child and not leaving them somehow in distress without that nest, because then you don't know what you're disrupting.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and all of this, and we haven't said this before, is, shaping their emotional systems, as we said, but also their sense of self, of who they are. And, you have here, Shore and others have written a lot about this, but how critical that is to have a very integrated understanding of the sense of self. Without that, it leads to so many pathologies. And so it all starts in early life.
Yes, and when people visit other societies where they provide the nest, they're just amazed by how confident young children are because they're getting nested. They, 4-year-olds are walking around like, and they're not coerced into doing things. They get to make their own decisions, and they're good at it, and they're listened to. And this is so strange to a westernized person's perception, right? Because we think we have to boss children around for all their childhood. And then finally in adulthood, they're supposed to be able to figure things out on their own, which is kind of upside down.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, it's a really good point too. When you provide the nest, you're developing a very confident and able child, and so there is less hovering and and provision in a sense that's needed to keep them, because the child knows and the child is really confident. And so that goes against a lot of the myths within our culture about how you have to make sure, children will do bad things and children will need to be coerced away from this or that. But if you provide the nest, then you're developing that confident child able to discern those things even on their own.
Right. So, Mary, you want to talk about the vagus nerve? That's something we study in our lab.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Oh, the vagus nerve is so awesome. So it's the 10th cranial nerve, 12 nerves coming off the brain. And vagus in Latin means wandering, and they named it that because it literally wanders throughout all of the body, innervating the heart and the lungs and the digestive tract and the immune system. And very, very important, it is part of the social engagement system. And so we know that the type of care you receive in early life is shaping the architecture of the brain. And in particular, this is just one example of one very important neurological component that is being shaped. And the vagus nerve helps calm and restore the body from places of stress. It's also operative, to be able to relax and calm yourself down, but it's also important to withdraw that vagus nerve and turn that vagal functioning off so that you can engage and step up in times when needed. And we know that it's operative in all social behavior. So when you have a really good, well-functioning vagus nerve, you're able to be dynamic with others and you're able to approach others, but you're also able to respond in times of stress so that your body can kick in the hormones and things that you need in order to take on that challenge, but that you don't become too stressed. You're not going out of whack in that thing, and you're not also becoming too placid either, just withdrawing. So the vagus nerve is really important in many things, if not everything we do all day long.
Right, and its functioning is shaped in early life. So we know that non-responsive parenting is going to dysregulate the vagus nerve and can lead to then problems in digestion and brain seizures and heart respiratory problems. And good vagus functioning then is related to capacities for intimacy and being compassionate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we see that the effects of responsive care, we see that it provides this good functioning vagal tone, right? Which means two things. It means everything physiologically is working well, your digestive tract, your heart, your respiration, your immune system, but also psychologically, it's helping regulate and facilitate everything with your emotions and also with self-regulation. And that we see that non-responsive care leads to this poor vagal tone, this dysregulated vagal tone. So there's this mismatch between what's happening in your social environment, or even what's happening with a situation you on your own, in your emotional response and your physiological response, right? And we also see that responsive care influences epigenetics. So Darcia, you want to say something about that?
Well, epigenetics has to do with whether your genes that you're born with are going to be expressed or not. Are they going to be turned on or off? And there's certain timings of care that matter for that gene expression. And we know from extensive studies of rats that those first 10 days of a rat's life are really critical to have a very nurturing mother to turn on genes that control anxiety for life. Now, for humans, that would be the first 6 months. You have to have a very responsive caregiver in the first 6 months to turn on those equivalent kind of genes. But throughout childhood, there's all sorts of epigenetic things going on. We hardly understand it these days. It's a new area.
Mm-hmm. An exciting area, I think.
Yes.
It's really neat. Yeah, and we see that responsive care, as we said before, and this is connected to epigenetics, affects the stress response. And so we see the type of care received, helps the stress response so that you're not becoming too stressed or not stressed enough.
And then we can look at secure attachment. This is attachment theory is prevalent now in developmental psychology. It's considered important factor in the child's well-being and related to all sorts of things. And the way to develop a secure attachment is for caregivers to actually be comforting and reassuring. And when the child's immature reflexive systems become distressed, to immediately comfort them so they get used to having immediate shutdown rather than ongoing increased stress escalating. And the caregivers then are conditioning the systems to be calm and to expect to be reassured over time. They'll build in that expectation instead of an expectation of not being comforted. Mm-hmm. And these are really, then it's important for caregivers to be predictably consistent in how they share their emotions and their cognitions, to coordinate those, because if you don't coordinate them, like I said before, if you say I love you and then I'm leaving you alone, or I spank you, that's a discoordination. The child's going to develop instead insecure attachment, which we'll talk about later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for example, with secure attachment, what happens is when you're providing that responsive care and you're comforting the child, and it's over and over and over again, as the child grows and is older, when there is a form of stress or distress, the child has this understanding and this prediction that I will be comforted. And so they're building that internal working model that comfort will come, right? And so this allows the child to calm him or herself down, and then, can go seek the parent or be comforted.
So secure attachment is critical in the first few years of life. It's possible to alter it later, but it takes a lot of work. So you want to provide then the need satisfaction, provide for those basic needs children have for lots of touch and attention and rocking and your physical presence and play and all the nest components. And then they will associate life with satisfaction, and they will associate happiness with being with you. And that will lead them then to the kind of relational landscape they'll look for later in life. So the child will develop a repertoire of social communication and behaviors. They build, there's so many layers of social skills that have to be developed. Dan Stern talked about why, he wondered why does it take so long for a child to learn to talk? It's because there's so many nonverbal communication aspects they have to learn first. And if you start talking too soon, you're going to miss learning those. So in those first couple years, before language really gets going, that's when you want to have really lots of close social relationships with more than just one person, primary caregiver, but lots of different people when the child is willing and able, so that they're developing a lot of repertoire of being flexible and being attuned and being kind of coordinated with multiple different kinds of people. And what that's going to do then is set up healthy baselines for social life. And the child who has that responsive caregiver is going to have a mental representation, that internal working model of being soothed that they'll carry with them throughout life.
Yeah, and we see that secure attachment fosters a lot of things that we've talked about earlier, but specifically it fosters empathy. So important to be able to give empathy to others. Also self-regulation, and what we mean by this is the regulation of both your thoughts and your emotions and your behaviors, your conscious development, openness, agency, self-efficacy, and competence. So those are some wonderful skills, right? And capacities to have.
So yes, and this is the mutually responsive orientation that Grozina Kohanska has studied for maybe a couple decades now, and how it's that mutually influential responsive friendship, companionship with caregiver that builds not only secure attachment, but all these other skills. You want to talk about right hemisphere development, Mary?
The right hemisphere. Oh, it's so awesome. So as most people know, I think within the culture, the left brain and the right brain kind of control and do different things. And we see that the right brain, as we said before, is developing more rapidly in the first few years of life. And the right brain controls a lot of very important things, including self-regulation, as we've said, intersubjectivity and social pleasure, emotional intelligence, empathy, the sense of beingness and presence and self-transcendence, consciousness. And as we talk about and are writing on now, actually, right? The right hemisphere is really fantastic at connecting information with a larger framework, with a larger view. And so it's constantly on the lookout for perceiving and understanding that which is new and that which is, beyond itself, versus the left hemisphere is very skilled at the detail and takes information within itself, right? Over and over again, kind of the information within itself. And so the right brain is so important to be able to connect the details of life to a much larger scheme, to a much larger picture.
And the right hemisphere is receptively intelligent. So it's picks up on, learns from experience in the world, embodied experience, and then it transfers that over to the left hemisphere that kind of uses it as a little sketch pad or something to decide what to do. But if you don't have enough right hemisphere, if you don't have enough embodied experience, your right brain doesn't get enough to give to that left hemisphere.
Yes, and the right hemisphere is also this embodied part. So it's more connected than the left hemisphere to the rest of your body. And so it is able to perceive embodied sensations in every way. And so without the right hemisphere, we're so disconnected to the rest of ourselves, really.
Right. So it's really important to foster and grow and nurture that right hemisphere in early life when it's scheduled to be growing, the capacities that will be carried forward. So this is from my book, Neurobiology and the Development of Human Morality, and I discuss how early experience of social pleasure in all these ways that we've been talking about, the receptive, responsive caregiving, fosters this kind of core of empathic effectivity, meaning that from having your caregivers be present to emotionally, treat you with reverence, practice intersubjectivity with you and empathy and take your perspective, and you get to practice all this and it's fun and you enjoy being with others, you're going to then develop a deep kind of empathy of getting along with others that's going to guide your life in the future. You won't go out and want to kill people. You won't go out and want to harm others because you have this deep core of connected empathy. And I talk also about how our brain kind of global mindsets are affected then by early care, nested care, especially the responsiveness we're talking about. So we're born with these survival systems, these basic mammalian emotion systems of anger, fear, panic, lust, seeking, integrated with the stress response. And the other systems have to be grown or shaped postnatally. Yep. Survival systems are also conditioned by poor early care, which we'll talk about later. So with good development, you're going to be able to control those survival systems, because when they get out of hand, you see red and you can't control yourself. You're just in this panic mode or anger mode, rage, right? But with good development, you're going to develop that box on the right, the executive functions, the ability to actually control the rest of your subcortical systems, and later on use abstraction and imagination. And so with good development, you're going to spend your time here in what I call heart-centered imagination. So the mammalian systems that are mentioned here, the care emotion system and the play emotion systems, those have to be grown after birth from the way your caregivers are treating you. Are they treating you with care and empathy? Then you're going to grow that yourself. Are they being playful with you in a kind way? Then you're going to grow that too, and that'll make your sociality much more skilled and more flexible for getting along with others. And so you mentioned earlier, Mary, the growth of the self. So this is the system, kind of a sense of how the self grows through life. You're going to have that coarse self that's going to be shaped by good care. You're going to be confident then. You're going to trust others, really important. From the responsive care you get, you build trust. If you have unresponsive care, of course, you're going to build distrust, and that's going to flavor your life. But when you have good care, you're going to feel safe, that you belong here in the world. You're confident because you're building all these skills of getting along. And over time, then you'll build an acting self where you're very socially skilled, you're empathic with others, and then you're going to eventually have that sense of communal self where you're really holistically integrated with others into the community, into the planet, into the natural world. And you want to summarize what we've been talking about, Mary?
Sure. So responsiveness is so important and has a lot of just fantastic lifelong effects on your well-being, both physiologically and psychologically. And one of them is that you'll have better stress regulation, which influences both your physiology and your psychological well-being. And you're able to self-regulate, as we talked about, because your right hemisphere is developed. So you're able to self-regulate arousal systems. You'll have greater contentment. And you have a heightened moral function, meaning that you have the capacity to feel and experience deep empathy and have a strong early conscious development. And this leads to both compassion and open-heartedness towards others, which we haven't, I don't think, stressed enough here, but that, you're going through life being open-hearted rather than being bracing and defensive and fearful. There's an openness. And this leads to cooperation and also a sense of giving and generosity. So now that we've talked about responsiveness and what it is and the effects, let's talk about non-responsive care and the effects and why it's harmful.
So what we've learned from evolution is that when you provide a species typical developmental system, you end up with a species typical outcome. But here, if you're not providing responsive care, you're providing a species atypical developmental system. It's unnestedness. And so you shouldn't be surprised when you end up with a species atypical outcome, which is a person who's outside the range of evolved intelligence, outside the range of effectiveness as a human being. And so if you think about what we do to kids in the United States, we leave them to cry, we leave them alone, we make them sit all day instead of playing. These are atypical ways of treating children. And we have one example here of the non-responsiveness of cry-it-out sleep training, because it still seems to be a
Prevalent, yeah,
prevalent
very prevalent.
way of treating babies. It's distressing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so why is it distressing? Or why is it so dangerous?
Right, it's distressing to me because I don't like to see babies mistreated. But it's distressing to the baby because it's flooding the brain with the wrong kinds of chemicals. The baby needs to be kept calm in order for growth-inducing biochemistry throughout the body. Otherwise, it stops growing and has to do something else. It has to preserve itself, right? Because you, the non-responsive caregiver, has left it in distress. So you can be then wired for oversensitivity if this happens routinely, and overreactivity. You're wiring the brain's stress response, its rage system, the brain's panic system. So you can have, later on, you can have panic attacks. You've just upgraded all these survival systems for that poor child, because what else can they do? They cannot regulate themselves. They are incapable in the first years of life to regulate themselves, and they need the caregiver to do it. So cry-it-out sleep training is the opposite of what a child needs.
Mm-hmm.
It predisposes baby to clinical depression, anxiety, mental and physical health problems, accelerated aging and mortality, early death. And so it's not appropriate in terms of what's physiologically or psychologically best for the baby.
Mm-hmm. And so when you stress the baby out, you're increasing cortisol. And as you were saying, when the baby is stressed, they're not growing. I mean, it's just that simple. Like the stress, they're trying to deal with the stress. And so you actually have a blog on this that is quite popular. So I encourage everyone to go read that if they would like to get some more information.
So you want to talk about this, Mary? What do we know from the animal studies?
Sure. So we know a lot from animal studies as well as from the Middlemiss article here you cite here with, this is done with human infants. And so they show that with babies, when you leave them alone to cry it out, yes, they will stop crying, but their cortisol levels do not go down. So what happens is they learn that the parent or the caregiver is not going to come. However, their stress level, cortisol is a hormone of stress, and so that is measuring their stress levels. And so there is a dissociation, this is what the article is saying, between what the child is doing and what is happening internally. And dissociation is not a good thing. Not a good thing. And so you're having a break between the heightened level of stress within the child, and then their behavior. And so it looks from a caregiver perspective that they have calmed down, but they're not. They need to be comforted and calmed by a caregiver.
So when babies are routinely left to cry or left alone, they learn to shut down in the face of extensive distress. So you as an adult might just freeze, go into a freeze or a dissociative state, and then other people can control you when that happens. So you don't want to create people who are going to be robots or conformists to authoritarians. This is how a lot of damage in the world is done. And the Nazis knew this, and they recommended the child raising to leave children to break their spirits. And when you leave a baby alone to cry, you are breaking their spirit, you're breaking their sense of trust in the world, in you, and in themselves. And so these are not recommended for healthy, optimal development. It's very anti-nest to use cry it out sleep training. And those, we recommend too that you learn not to wait till a baby cries to give them attention. That's waiting too long. It's a late signal. So you need to move in before the baby starts to cry, so you can pay attention to their gestures. That's how they communicate, their facial expression, and then move in and keep them comforted. Because in those first couple of years, remember, all these systems are setting up how they're going to function for the rest of life. And you don't want to have a person who's easily stressed out and gets all mad and rages around, or just freezes and goes into a dissociated state. That's not what we want for our children. We don't want that for our fellow citizens, because we want their unique, beautiful spirits to be with us now and not be conditioned by their past. So if we look again at the brain function, these are global brain states again. What happens instead of this ideal way that we see in societies that provide the nest of staying in the heart-centered imagination, what happens with early toxic stress, it's going to enhance those survival systems. And so what happens instead is when your stress response kicks in, it actually shifts the blood flow away from your higher order thinking, away from being open-minded or open-hearted, and it's going to control all those aspects of your higher order thinking. And if the baby is routinely toxically stressed, they really don't develop those social aspects of care and play that are part of our human adaptation, our human species way of getting along with others. That's what's many people say is what kept our species going, is that's pro-social orientation of cooperating with others. But when you leave a baby alone and toxically stress them in that way and other ways, you're not going to have that kind of person. So Mary, tell us.
Yes, so I mean, put simply, that it's the title of this slide is that undercare is toxic. And so when you're not providing a child what they need when they need it, you can have potentially toxic stress. So this is stress that's unmanageable to the child, and the result is that it is affecting, as we said before, when you have high levels of stress, the baby is not able to grow. And so this changes the development of the brain, particularly the structural integrity of the brain. It also affects hormonal regulation. And all of these systems are critical for sociality. And so it makes sense when we then look at the levels of anxiety and depression, both here in the US, they're at epidemic proportions among all age groups, suggesting there's this widespread deficiency.
So poor early experience then is going to lead to not to secure attachment but to one of these types of insecure attachment, or worse. We don't talk about disorganized here, but avoidant attachment is when a baby has routinely had emotionally rejecting caregivers. And so they learn to inhibit their emotions. They don't work, they're worthless, and then they become emotionally underdeveloped. Unfortunately, many of us professors have this kind of attachment. So we learn to go into our heads, to intellectualize instead of to be emotionally skilled. So that's not a good thing, because you can make decisions in this very emotionally detached way that are harmful to others. And you can see that in some of the ways that very smart people, like Robert McNamara, who managed the Vietnam War, made all these bad decisions because he didn't really feel connected or bonded to other people. That's my theory. And then the other type of insecure attachment, you want to talk about that, Mary?
Sure. So this is ambivalent and anxious, insecure attachment. And this comes from inconsistent caregiving. And so the result is learning to use emotion to coerce. And we see that there is an underdeveloped cognition here.
Right. So then you use your emotions to dramatically, be a drama queen, or push people around and bully them, and that kind of thing. Where that's how you know how to get your way met, your needs met. So these are kind of, in my view, twisted ways of being a human being. And they are, especially avoidant has been going up in the United States in recent decades. And some societies have quite a lot of avoidant people in the Western world. So insecure attachment is a signal of the toxic stress of caregiving relationships in early life, and represents disrupted emotional or cognitive functioning. It's going to compromise your social abilities, and it's going to promote a bias then towards self-preservation. So as I said, with the brain functioning, you're conditioned then by your past, by not feeling safe in the past, is going to rear its ugly head in the present and then control your reactions. So you lose free will. So when early life doesn't match up with an evolved nest, you're going to have various problems depending on when it happened and how long, and timing, intensity, duration of the undercare or the trauma or the toxic stress. You'll have one of these or more. You'll feel the world's not safe. You can't trust your feelings. You can't really trust people. You'll have an inflated ego, a chip on the shoulder to protect yourself, because there is nobody there to protect you. You need, as a baby, to have a protector. Your mother is supposed to be your protector, your father, your caregiver, so you don't get distressed and feel like you're falling into the abyss, right? And so if nobody's there, you're going to have one of these things going on or more. Distorted thinking and feeling, perception. You're going to be governed by the past. You're going to just feel like you're alone in the world more than connected to the world. And you'll have an overextended striving orientation to try to calm down your anxieties that you have. You're going to want to achieve things, get famous or money or power or whatever it is, because you can't just be in the moment. You don't feel safe or secure. And so your ethics are going to be misdeveloped. You're going to be more self-centered rather than compassionate. And your world will be a different world than those who have responsive care in early life that sets up the brain properly.
Yeah, this is such a great slide, because this is from your 2014, award-winning 2014 book. And you can see on here just the effects of the nest when you don't receive the nest, that it's affecting your cognitions, it's affecting your emotions, it's affecting how you perceive things, which is just huge. And, then your behaviors in addition to your ethics. So I think this is a great slide, really showing, and and then the thoughts and the narratives that you begin to live by in the little bubbles on the side, right? I can't trust my feelings. I can't trust people. The world is not safe. So these mantras that are going on inside your head.
Right. And they can be, often it's a dominator kind of psychology where you go into, well, I have to dominate everybody or else I'm not safe. I have to dominate everyone and get everyone's attention, or else I'm worthless. Right. And so you set up these very strange notions of what a good life is.
Mm-hmm. And oftentimes it's unconscious.
Yes.
Right, Darcia. So these narratives are going off, and we're really, being bound by them, and they're kind of dictating all of our thoughts and perceptions and emotions and behaviors, but it is unconscious, because the right brain is what's developed and controls the unconscious or the implicit self, and that's what's being undermined. right? With
That's right.
lack of the nest.
Yes, and it happens here. Neuroception is this subconscious way of reacting to a situation. It happens right away, really quickly. You don't know what's happening. Call it bottom up. And you feel either safe or unsafe. You see it at the bottom of this diagram. So if you feel safe in a situation, you're going to be more open and attuned to others, you know, and kind of relaxed and feel like it's a rewarding situation, and, you know, you can move out and about. But if you don't feel safe, if you feel unsafe in that moment, you're going to go into your defensive mode, this fight, flight, freeze, faint, which is a hiding, dissociated kind of state. And you're not going to be yourself because you're hiding behind your walls of defense. And people who are poorly cared for in early life are going to end up over on the right side most of the time because they don't feel safe with others. If they were left with a teddy bear or with their iPhone all the time and were left and ignored, why do they want to get along with other people? It's not pleasurable. It doesn't feel safe. You know, I just want to go to my little desk and read my book or watch TV or something, right? So anyway, so that's the bottom up stuff. And then there's the top down shifting as well. Do you want to say something first about the bottom up?
No, keep going. This is great.
All right.
Great.
So the other way that we go into this feeling of safe or unsafe is also a top down way. The stories that we've been told about people and about situations. So if your parents told you, oh, green people are dangerous, stay away from them, they'll hurt you. And they keep talking about that, these green people. Then you're going to, when you see a green person, you're going to bing, go into that unsafe mode and then try to feel, you know, safer. And you might do that by dominating and pushing them around or running away somehow or just ignoring them, right? So there's bottom up neuroception and top down neuroception that is actually going to then guide your life. So the freedom, though, is on the left side of the diagram there. It's the ability to choose in the moment to be flexible and open and attuned. The right side of the diagram is the unfree side. It's your free will has been taken away from you from the lack of capacities that were not developed in early life due to how your caregivers cared for you and how they were cared for in older generations. Yeah.
Yeah, and on the left-hand side too, you have the ability, as we've talked about, with the ability to abstract and to reflect. And so when you encounter a narrative that tells you to be afraid of green people, you're able to think about that and go, you know, actually, I don't think that's right, you know? And so you're able to think about it and cogitate upon it, and so that you don't immediately go into a defense mode, right? And
Yeah.
you still remain open and engaged with those green people.
Yes, excellent point. Yep.
Okay, so now let's move on to culture. So let's take a bigger point of view. How does this influence culture?
Unfortunately, in the United States, there's really a promotion of adult detachment from babies. We've got sleep experts that emphasize parental detachment from the baby, you know, be in charge of your baby, get your life back. I hear this from parents reporting to me about the advice they're given, and that babies are supposed to sleep alone, you know. No, they're not. No, they're not. Who told you that? You know, and we can
Or
see.
to sleep through the night,
Yeah,
right? This is also a myth, yeah.
Or they don't need breast milk or all sorts of things. They don't need the nest. What do you mean? Part of this is probably that kind of old scientific idea of pre-formation where babies were assumed to be just miniature adults. They just had to be bigger. They just have to get big. So,
oh my gosh.
But now we have genes. Oh, it's genetic, you know, it's whatever, their genes control everything, right? No, they don't. No, they don't.
Oh, no.
So you got these illusions, these myths. Part of it is, you know, parents are kind of stressed because they don't have the village to help them raise the child. And so they want anything so they can get a good night's sleep. But babies aren't ready to sleep. They have no melatonin production in the first 3 months of life, for example. They cannot. They need the breast milk to signal to them that it's time to sleep now because it provides tryptophan, you know, make them sleepy. At the right time, it has to be breastfed, not the bottle. If the bottle from the morning is fed at night, oh my goodness.
It's the wrong milk.
It's the wrong milk. If it's pumped milk, yeah. So anyway, babies need parents, need the caregivers to help them regulate in so many ways. We hardly understand it. So we can see in the last 50 years how the evolved nest is degraded since I was a child, even before I was a child. And now we're in pretty much the worst place to raise a child here. Yes, I will say it. There's no parental leave. There's no tenderness towards babies and children. And so we have all sorts of people, every age, that have self-regulation problems, mental and physical health problems, continuing to deteriorate. And compared to other advanced nations, people under age, I think it's now 55, 57, have worse health outcomes. So,
Yeah, and you know, we don't have on this slide, but I know we have somewhere else about the statistics in the US of adults living alone, right? It's around, isn't it around 50%?
Yes, 50%
like that. I
of
mean, it's
households.
so high. It's so high. And so this is the culture, right, that's being promoted. And you can see how this is the antithesis of a baby needing a village of help all around it.
Right. So we have all sorts of then myths about baby independence. So that forcing babies into independent sleeping is good for them? No. It supposedly increases health and well-being. According to what? Now those studies are terrible. They're very misleading studies, so don't believe them. It supposedly puts baby on a road toward healthy physical outcomes that you're going, no.
No.
Babies learn to settle themselves at night. No, they shut down. Is that what you want? You want your child to be shut down? No, you want them to be themselves, to grow and flourish and blossom. They're not going to do that if you do this to them, right? So I'm speaking from my baby advocacy soapbox here. And self-regulatory skills will be damaged, emotional well-being, again, trust. So all these things are wrong, that they think that they're going to establish self-reliance. Instead, you're going to have a very dependent child who feels unconfident because of what you did to them. Oh, sorry, I'm really, really strong here.
No, but it's so true. I mean, it's the antithesis of what the myth is, you know, wanting your child to be independent. By treating them that way, they actually become very dependent, right? Versus giving them what they need and providing the nest. That's what builds a confident and self-reliant individual.
Yeah, people are complaining, oh, helicopter parents are coddling your children. Well, that's because they didn't give them everything they needed as a baby. And so they're so unconfident, and the parents realize it. You know, they can't handle it, right? Because they've interfered in the wrong ways at the wrong time and didn't provide for basic needs.
Yes. So this is a great one. So this is, you know, baby independence. Really, it's not about the baby, is it? It's really about the adults. It means detached adults. And so these beliefs and those who are advocating it, unfortunately, are not as educated in human development as could be. And we see that it's really about the adults promoting their needs kind of over the babies. And so we write about this in other places, that all of a sudden the needs of the infants become a challenge, right, to adult needs. And so there is this competition going on between the adult and the child, rather than seeing this all as, you know, this beautiful symphony, really, of trying to help everyone in the family have their needs being met, everyone in the community being met. The baby becomes this threat to adults. And so it's a completely different way of understanding the development of the human person.
Yeah, and they're mothers who report that they have to go back to work in 6 weeks because there's no paid parental leave, and so they don't want to get attached to their babies. So they are forced by the society's institutions and practices to be detached because they don't want the pain themselves of having to tear away from the baby. So again, it's very adult centric and baby harming. And we have this cultural taboo on tenderness. This is Ian Seti who noted this, a therapist, and said that, pointed out how since at least the 19th century that mothers have been told not to spoil their children with too much attention. And the mostly male experts argued against coddling children. Oh my goodness, it's going to make them weak and whiny. Even U.S. government got into it, telling mothers not to be inconvenienced by their babies. Let them sit alone in their beds, and
Wow.
pat them on the head. And these are things that so-called experts in Germany advised. This kind of cold-heartedness towards babies, so that you'd be able to control that child, that person later when they're older.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, so having said that, we need to learn how to be responsive. So what are some ways that we can learn this?
Right, and this is something it's hard to find it in the culture, because the assumption is babies don't need responsiveness, right? And it's not pictured. You don't see it. You see unresponsiveness in movies and TV shows where they let babies cry, and I always have to mute the TV when there's a child in distress. I can't believe that's abuse. They wouldn't let that happen to an animal in the shows, right? You have to say that you didn't hurt any animals, but they're hurting babies in these shows. Anyway, my soapbox is live and well here.
It's great.
So,
it's great. The passion is wonderful.
Oh, well, it gets moms mad, right? Because it sounds like I'm blaming them, but I'm not blaming the moms. I'm blaming culture, right? And the lack of understanding. So what's a good enough mother? Well, there's a lot on the slides that come here, so you can read it. We'll just talk about a few things, and then the viewer can read it, slow it down, and read it through. But good enough means that you've got a degree of adaptation to the baby's needs from the beginning, because the personality is being laid down. Now, the baby's not going to remember it, because they don't have those memory systems developed yet. But if they're held well, they won't remember it, but they will remember not being held well. That will be obvious because of their dysregulated personality and disagreeableness. So most mothers, by and large, have the instincts to be good enough mothers, to be adapting to the baby. And they need to not be interfered with the natural rhythms of birth and postnatal care and so on. D.W. Winnicott, therapist, famous for advocating good enough mothering. Then mother love is talked about by Dr. Margaret Ribble. So mid-20th century, there's a lot of writing about the importance of baby care and empathic care for babies, because they were paying attention to it then. So this is mother love. What she talks about is the term that she uses, and the importance of reassurance, and the baby has to be carried about until baby can move on his or her own. Gives them a sense of security, equilibrium, and especially the reassurance. So the fondling, caressing, rocking, singing, speaking to the babies have deep significance for babies. The mothers help the baby learn breathing. So the breathing has to reverse the diaphragm from when the baby was in the womb. The diaphragm has to move in the opposite direction. So it takes a while to learn that. So babies are often oxygen deprived after a while. They have some stored up in the liver, so don't worry in the first couple days, but they do need to learn how to breathe after that. They need to learn how to suck in order for proper jaw development and proper speaking development later, and to feel. Then we have Dr. John Weil, and he studied Okinawans and American families, and then contrasted those with Nazis too. And so this is what he came up with: empathic care. So this providing enduring, positive, pleasurable context with the infant, so that the infant feels calm, comforted, and protected. Watchful attention to the conditions. The mother needs to have that, or the primary caregiver, so that the baby again is kept calm and comforted. And tenderness, a general orientation of preventing over arousal in the infant. Do you want to talk about Hughes and Balin's book?
So, we have done a podcast reviewing this book, and so I recommend everyone to listen to that as well. But they have several points here about how parenting influences a number of systems within the developing brain, and they particularly point out how the parental approach system is what is operating within the parent, and also the parental reward system. And when these are healthy, then they are able to provide really responsive care, understanding the child, and also able to make sense of behavior. And I think a big thesis of the book is that the parent who has these well-developed parental approach systems, parental reading system, the parental reward system, is that they're able to look at behavior and see it from trying to understand the behavior rather than quickly judging the behavior. So they're approaching the child and saying, how is this beautiful person before me developing now? What's going on inside them now? And how can I help them, rather than, oh my gosh, why did they do that? That is just horrible, right? So this is a completely different way of orienting towards the child. And when you are able to orient in that way, then you can reason and you can make sense of behaviors, and you can see what is the child really needing, what are they really trying to do, what are they experimenting with, what are they trying to learn, how are they feeling. All of these questions, then the parent is able to reflect upon and then provide the type of care, the type of teaching, the type of instruction, the type of companionship care that the child needs in the moment.
And they talk about blocked care of different kinds, acute in the moment kind of blocked care when the parent is emotionally blocked, can't provide nurturing care to the child. Chronic would be routine because of, that acute would be when the parent is, maybe their parent died or something. And so at that moment,
an event happened,
Yeah, some event happened. And then chronic is problematic because somehow the parent's own background or own experience is routinely triggered. And then a child specific is a particular child you don't get along well with, and then stage specific, a particular age.
Yeah, so this is something that happens within the parent's life, whether in their own childhood or an event that happened, within recent events, that somehow blocks the parent from being able to relate to the child in that way I just described, that open, trying to understand the person of the developing child before them.
Right. So they describe various ways to compensate and to learn to get past block care in the book, and highly recommended. And one of the ways is to learn pace, which is playfulness, to approach your child with these habits of playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. Mm-hmm. So our last encouraging words. Okay, I'll say something and then Mary, you be more encouraging.
That's not a challenge.
Oh. It's just that I get on my soapbox and I become a baby advocate, and then I, offend people. I'm not thinking about the parents. So yes, so my advocacy is to put the baby first, follow the baby, learn their signals, carry them around, be with them, be a companion, be a friend. And those are the things that are going to build a cooperative person that you're going to enjoy throughout life. And this is the time for investment, is in babyhood, before age 3, rearrange your life so you can be with that baby, and get other people to help you, because you can't just do it by yourself. It's too much, too stressful, and find ways to do that.
I guess my last encouraging words would be, if parents are struggling with one particular aspect of the nest or being responsive in a particular way, the answer is, or the question that needs to be asked is, what does the parent need in order to provide this. It's not how can the child go without this, but there's something that the parent needs, and I really believe that parents are creative and are trying their best, and so they can use that creativity and their imagination to think of ways that they can meet their own needs in order to provide more fully for their children.
Wonderful, yes. And here are references for the infant care. And we thank you very much. And for more information, find us at evolvednest.org and these other places. Thanks so much. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Tarsha.
Bye-bye.